So what were some of the first projects where you started to go from Second Life to like these head-mounted displays in virtual reality, which in the timeline speaking was way before Oculus Rift even came about?
So the next piece that I built, I was actually invited to a lab in Barcelona by a guy named Mel Slater. His lab's called the Event Lab, and he runs it with his neuroscience wife, Maria Bibe Sanchez. And we built a piece where we put you in a body of a detainee in a stress position. And we're using the goggles called the Wide 5, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But in that particular piece was kind of astonishing because we had people wearing a breathing strap, and they were sitting upright in a chair, but they had their hands behind their back, and that was it. But they were upright. And yet when the experience began, they were also wearing a breathing strap so that their breath could be paralleled by a virtual avatar that they saw in a mirror when they went inside. They would look in this mirror, and this avatar in a stress position, all hunched over in a stress position, moved whenever they moved their head and was breathing at the same time as they were. And they'd look down and they see their knees were hunched up. And in the meantime, we did a binaural recording of a recreation of a interrogation of a man named Al-Qahtani that the Bush administration said had been tortured. So I took real logs and created this interrogation that you heard. And in the meantime, you see your body in the stretch position. And I have to tell you, that kind of blew my mind because everybody who came out of it, we'd say, well, what was your body like? And they would hunch over as if they were in the stress position when they'd been sitting upright. And I began to recognize how quickly, one could adapt and adopt to a virtual body, especially wearing head-mounted display goggles and with good audio. So that was kind of when I became hooked. And I weaseled my way into a lab at USC, which was actually down the street instead of having to go to Barcelona. It's just that the first guy I worked with, Mel Slater, who I'm still working with, is really a god in the virtual reality field. He's been doing this since VR1, and he's just brilliant. So once I worked with him, I had more acceptance in the VR research community, and I was invited to a lab in LA called the Institute for Creative Technologies, which is a University of Southern California virtual reality research lab. And that's run by a guy named Mark Bolus, and Mark was actually the guy who created the Wide 5 head-mounted display goggles. But the Wide 5, there are very few left in the world, and only one left at the lab in LA. And Palmer Luckey had found a pair of Mark's old goggles at a fire sale from a bankrupt hospital. And he'd called Bolus and said, hey man, how did these work or whatever? And Bolus invited him over. And pretty soon Palmer was there building goggles and trying to make lower cost goggles. And I was there. It was this crazy summer where a lot of really brilliant people all ended up in this particular lab. At that point, I was working as a research fellow at the USC School of Communications and Journalism. I was a research fellow in immersive journalism is what I was calling myself at that point. And there was a class on hunger for the journalism school students in which they were doing traditional reporting. They were doing a news piece for the web and audio for the web and video for the web. And I wanted to build an immersive piece because I really wanted people to feel what it was like for people who are invisible. Those waiting in the food bank line, they're invisible. How do I make them more visible? And as you can see, I'm always drawn to human rights stories. So I went out and recorded audio at food banks. The one thing I have to say that these pieces, they don't work unless the audio is good. But with the audio, you can get away with a lot of problematic graphics. But you can't with bad audio. So I went out with my intern, and we were out recording audio at food banks until a day where she came back to my office and was just in tears because she just witnessed a man who had diabetes, and he was waiting in this long line for food. And this woman at this church was overwhelmed. I mean, she's literally yelling, there's too many people, and she can't feed them all, and the line's not moving fast enough. And he goes into a coma because he doesn't get food in time. And using that audio, I rebuilt the entire street scene, and you become a witness as this man collapses. And it got into the Sundance Film Festival, into New Frontiers for 2012. But the problem was there's only that one pair of Wide 5 goggles. What was I going to do? So there was a real push on Palmer to get goggles ready. And it's funny, I just searched my email, which I hadn't done, of old emails from 2011 between Palmer and myself and a guy named Evan Suma and Tai Fan, and all of us trying to get these goggles ready so that would work. And there's distortion problems that would make you feel, I used to call it the drunken sailor effect, and you feel woozy and walking weird, and that was a distortion code, not so much a hardware issue. And I wouldn't let the goggles leave. We had a truck ready to drive the equipment to Sundance, and I wouldn't let them leave until it was late, 10 p.m. at night to drive to Utah. Poor Tracy McSherry, the owner of FaceBase, the tracking equipment, he actually drove the truck and he waited patiently for that to happen. So the first night we go to opening night, and I'm terrified, right? Nobody's ever done this before. And I can play some audio, or I'll give you the audio piece. You can record it in. So what'd you think? Oh, you're crying. You're crying. Gina, you're crying. Oh. Of me talking to this woman, and she takes off the goggles, and she goes, oh, my God. And you can hear my voice. I'm saying, Gina, you're crying. Oh, my God, you're crying. And I had more people in tears. I had people on the ground trying to hold the seizure victim's head. I had people, when he falls, reach in their pocket and yank out their phone to dial 911 before they realized that they were just in a virtual reality construct. I mean, the power of VR, it really blew my mind that night. And again, that was like, okay, this is it. This is where I need to be working. I don't want my audiences sitting in some seat. I want them on scene. So Palmer came to that festival to help. Crashed in my hotel room. He very kindly drove the equipment all the way back across the country for me.